We're joined by CAN Australia's board member Ian McGregor. CAN is an organization of many environmental groups. Why don't you tell us what CAN is?
Well, CAN is a global network of more than 500 environmental NGOs who really want us to take decisive action to turn around the trajectory on climate change so we actually address the problem, not keep talking about it.
And I'll tell our viewers watching from around the world, if you're here in the conference center, you know that CAN International is an extremely prominent voice of civil society. They're the ones that hold the press conferences every day that really give the sense of what's happening in the negotiations and what that means for regular people around the world.
It's been much harder to be a prominent voice of civil society since about only 20% of our delegates are now allowed in the conference center into the negotiations, because there were over 300 of us in here. Now there's less than 50.
Yeah, we've been covering that for the past couple of days, a very interesting situation. But Ian McGregor, you have managed to get in here. You watched President Obama's speech and the speeches of many of the other world leaders this afternoon and this morning. What did you think?
I thought President Obama's speech was very disappointing. He didn't put anything new on the table. The commitments by the US are very weak. They're like 15% below 1990 levels, way below the Europeans, who I believe will go to 30% relatively easily. They're waiting for the US to make a serious commitment. The US commitment is so much below the EU levels and way below the 40% emission reductions that the Annex 1 countries need to make to address the science. We've got a melting planet and we're not addressing it.
So you were hoping Obama would push a little further on US emissions targets today?
I think Obama has to push a lot further on US emission targets. They are really disappointing.
What did you see from the other world leaders that maybe did impress you?
Lula from Brazil did impress me. He gave an honest assessment that we are not addressing the problem. We know about the problem. We've known the science of the problem for more than 20 years. But there's been 20 years of negotiations since the 1992 UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and we haven't addressed the problem.
So this is all, none of this is news to those of us here in the conference center. What were we hoping to hear from Obama today? Targets is one thing. I don't think it was too likely that President Obama was just going to come here and change the targets he's been talking about for months now. But was there something else he could have done, something political, something tangible to bring all these negotiations together?
Well, some of the other messages in the speech reflected the backroom negotiations that's been going on between the big parties such as India, Brazil, China, etc., pushing India, Brazil and China to accept measurable, reportable, verifiable targets, which all the Annex 1 countries accepted under Kyoto, that they'd report their emissions, they'd be measured and verified so that we actually know how much greenhouse gas emissions we're emitting. So there's a push on that. Hillary yesterday announced the move to $100 billion a year, which is about half what is needed from 2020 to finance mitigation and adaptation in the poor developing countries. So the finance part of it was one of the things that really helped negotiations move forward yesterday. After Hillary's announcement, they broke back into negotiations and things moved forward, but I believe stalled again with the leaders as Lula mentioned. He was up till 2 o'clock in the morning trying to broker deal with the other leaders, but that fell over about 2 o'clock in the morning.
And the Danish Prime Minister, after Lula's speech, mentioned Lula spoke about needing wise men to come together and cut a deal here. And I think even the Danish Prime Minister recognized actively from the podium the wisdom of Lula's words and said that he might be one of those wise men. I'm here. I'll remind everybody this is oneworld.net and OneClimate.net, broadcasting directly from the UN Climate Change Conference here in Copenhagen, Denmark. I'm with my colleague Daniel Nelson as well. Danny, what have you been hearing and seeing around the hall today?
Well, just on reactions, I feel a bit sorry for Obama, actually. The weight of expectations on him is always so enormous, and everyone was thinking this conference is moving with very inadequate response for industrialized countries. Obama will solve it. So I doubt if he could have lived up to expectations, actually, although he could have done something. But my overall impression of that session when the leaders were coming was that they were restating their positions. Each one really restated what they've been saying in negotiations and outside consistently for the last few days. And in a way, it underlined the impasse we've reached, because no one, I mean, there were good speeches. Lula's was good, and he got all the applause, not Obama, which must have been a rather unusual experience for Obama. But it did seem as though they were just saying again, the developing countries were stating what they wanted, committing to Kyoto, doing what we can, but development is absolutely a key issue. We've got to develop the industrialized countries, more or less, and I'm not quite sure where we go from here.
Ian McGregor, what do you think of that?
I think Lula went a bit further, and that's why he got applause. He really outlined where the negotiating blocks were and where the blockages were, and how the Annex I countries had to make higher commitments to reduce emissions in order to recognise their historic responsibility. The fact that they have developed, they can have 3 meals on their table. For people in developed countries, no problem. He pointed out that many people in Brazil, India, China, a lot of Africa have problems getting enough food to eat. And we're worried about whether we can have another colour plasma TV.
I think that's why he got the applause, because he was stating absolute basic fact of these talks. This is the underlying factor.
And we spoke with John Prescott, former Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom yesterday, and he said, many of his colleagues in Europe that he's spoken to say, but we have the poor in our country we need to deal with. And John Prescott said, I say to them, your poor are not living on $2 a day.
European or Australian or US poor are not living on $2 a day, and they generally can get 3 meals on their table. The poor are a big issue. Our Pacific Island neighbours that Australia is trying to bully into accepting a 2-degree target are another big issue, because if we go for a 2-degree target in the way the Annex I countries are going with very low emission cuts, they will disappear underwater in this century. So their countries will not survive. So that's why Lula pointed out, for many nations, it's a matter of survival.